Broadcasting from the Faith Bunker in a secret location, Sheep Below Ministries presents The Bunker Brothers.
We are Christian men, fathers, and husbands, but we are also former correctional officers. Just like everyone who has ever been in the first responder world, you know that it can change your view on everything.
A while back, we decided to dig into our Christianity, its people, theology, apologetics, and history. We try to do this with humor, honesty, and respect. Now, we want to include you in our conversation. I'm Daniel Audette.
And I'm Andrew Graham. And together we are
The Bunker Brothers.
And we're back.
We are back. Graham, it's so wonderful to be here this evening with you. We are going to finally take up a topic that we have worked very hard to work on.
Maybe we can finally get it right this time.
Well, we wanted to actually talk about some of the issues in church history and kind of talk about the Crusades. And
you mean that really important religious war that happened 1,000 years ago that nobody knows anything about?
Yeah, the one that everyone rubs in every Christian's face because they think it's the war that was the absolute worst and the worst, terriblest things happened, and it proves that Christians are actually quite barbaric, and we always are starting trouble and starting fights. And,
or we were 1,000 years ago.
Well, okay. So
I'm not going to let go of the fact that it was 1,000 years ago.
I don't want to jump too hard, but and downplay the importance of the Crusades. But I want to tell you that once you really get done fully studying this as a time in history, you end up realizing how small a slice of actual history it really is. For being something that is rubbed in everybody's noses in Christianity. So, I mean, I just think it's interesting to take up, and I feel like that people over-romanticize the time period.
Well, they do, and there's several reasons for that.
Well, one is the lore concerning the Templar Knights, how cool they are.
And the other Teutonic orders.
Absolutely.
There's lots of things to romanticize about it. However, what's the truth of it?
Well, the truth is a little bit different, and it is stranger than fiction for sure when it comes to the Crusades.
Has some pretty weird moments in it, I'll give you that.
It does. So, Graham, what really trips off the Crusades? We know that there was a lot going on during this time, and part of this is,
Well, let's talk about the religious angle first.
It's a knee-jerk reaction.
Number one, there were 2 popes in Europe.
2 popes. How is that possible?
I don't even know the history behind that. We'll have to dig into that a little bit more later. But I do know that there was
I'm a poper. Would you like to be a poper too? Sing.
That's a Dr.
I know,
Pepper
right? Sorry.
commercial, and I don't drink Dr. Pepper.
It was really good. I do. Thanks.
So there were 2 popes in Europe. The pope that we're going to talk about was Urban II. He had been deposed to France.
He was a less popular pope.
He was the minor pope, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know a whole lot about the history of the popery.
Right, potpourri.
Potpourri.
Yeah, potpourri. That's funny.
However, I don't know a lot about that particular history, but maybe we can take that up sometime too.
But a call for help did go out, right?
So, in Eastern Europe, in the Greek Orthodox tradition, you had an emperor by the name of Alexius
Comnenus.
Thank you.
Yes, Alexis Comnenus.
And yes, he did send word to Pope Urban to get some extra help with fighting the Turks.
So the Turks had taken a lot of territory that had belonged to the Byzantines, which was the remains of sort of the Eastern kingdoms, and they were considered the Greek Orthodox region. There had been a church split in Christianity between the East and the West, the iconoclastic division.
Right.
Or, that basically the Eastern Church was like, well, we're not going to have idols. And the Western Church was, well, we're going to use art to depict, because our people can't read. We're going to use art. And so it became a real division. And so now you have the last bastions of Christianity in the East losing major territory to a new power, which were the Seljuk Turks. Not all Turks, just the Seljuk ones. They were really good at war, and they had taken a lot of territory.
Well, one of the things they had going for them was horseback archers.
Light horseback archers,
and
yes.
that was something that Western civilization didn't know anything about.
Yeah, they weren't as adept at that. They did believe in heavy one-on-one fighting. Archery was there. Certainly it was, but we're talking about cultures that...
But that was long-range archery.
Right.
This was horseback, fast-moving, sniper-style archers.
Yeah, it was hard to...
And it was hard for them to defend because they couldn't move as well because of the heavy armor.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Well, what happened was that the Byzantines got beat a couple times. They lost Edessa. They lost different locations that were key. And really, they realized if we don't do something, it's not going to be too long where Seljuk Turks are sitting at the very gates of Constantinople, and we're all done. Which is weird because ultimately that would happen, but it would happen down the road. I mean, They were trying to really stop-gap measure here. So Comnenus sends out a plea for help, and Urban sees an opportunity.
And so he goes to, what was the name of that little town? It was in France.
Yeah.
And I'll find the name of it in just a second.
Where they held the council.
It's Clermont. Thank you.
Council of Clermont.
You see, you got me back online.
It's all good.
The Council of Clermont.
1095.
And he never actually uses the word crusade because that word was not invented yet.
That is true. That's true.
That word did not exist at the time.
Yeah.
But he called for troops. Actually, what he called for was for the landowners and the nobles and the rich folks to build armies to go help the Eastern Empire. He didn't call for everybody to get up and leave at that moment and go fight.
He did not get what he actually asked for.
He was
first.
looking for a year down the road or so.
Well, it was supposed to be an actual military campaign.
Right.
Conducted in actual military style with actual military planning and logistics. And you know what really happened?
It sounds like a good idea.
It's a great idea.
To actually plan things.
This is very true. So, but people did overwhelmingly respond. It's just, it came in the form of two different groups.
Yeah.
One was the well-trained guys who were going to at least do it right by their standards at that day. And then there was the rest of the scoundrels who decided to show up.
Well, Urban messed up.
Yeah.
Urban made a promise that I'm not sure he could keep.
What, that everybody that went would be saved and their sins would be forgiven and indulgence? That old chestnut.
He started promising that this would, make up for whatever sins you had committed. Well, soldiers are known to commit lots of sins.
Yeah.
So soldiers...
And not knocking soldiers, but we're talking about soldiers back in this time period where looting, raping, and killing was kind of a standard for what you did to other people. I mean, that is not the way we do it today, and we're not condemning military. We're making an observation on ancient militaries. Ancient militaries were just so weird.
Yeah. But, so, you had the soldiers who got excited about it, because this was their one opportunity, or says they saw it was their one opportunity. You had the lay folk get excited because, number one, they could get away from their hard life at home.
Yeah.
They could get away from their wives and kids for a little while.
Yeah, it was medieval Europe. It wasn't great.
And, they could go do something different. They had the promise of forgiving sins.
Deal.
They could make the Pope happy all at the same time, or so they thought.
Let's do it.
So he makes this speech. He calls for this, what we now call a crusade. And what was the response he got from the crowd?
Well, the famous Deus Vult thing. God wills it. God wills it.
I'm glad you added that because I don't speak Latin.
Well, I don't speak Latin. I did take Latin as part of my studies, but I can read it a little bit better than I can speak it. But it is really cool because that's what they did. They said God wills it. They decided God really wanted this to happen. And I can't say God didn't, because if this battle wouldn't be fought, then we would have probably looked at Europe being handed over to the invading forces. This wasn't just a struggle between religion concepts. This is a struggle for the existence of different civilizations.
Yeah.
And
Now let's
you know.
let's put this in frame of reference. We keep talking about ancient, but this was November of 1095.
Oh, that's not too long ago.
That's 1,000 years.
It's a long time ago.
Almost
now,
1,000 years. For
Right.
those that you're going to get technical and comment on it.
After Urban did his announcement, the first group that came, there are going to be two interesting groups that spike up right here. There's actually a few more, but there's definitely two. One are going to be the guys who are kind of semi warrior class people. They're going to go out and they're going to take this as, hey, I got an idea. Let's go ahead and do a little crusade at home. And obviously, if we're going to go attack the Middle East, which wasn't the Middle East back then, it was just the East. If we're going to go and attack that, that means we should go kill the Jews in our city. And so that's what they did.
Huh?
That is not what.
That doesn't make sense.
Number one, it's not what Pope Urban. That's not what Pope Urban. That's not what he said.
No, that's not what he said at all.
And then number two, when
it's not even close to what he said.
They started going through different European cities, and they started killing Jewish people, taking their stuff, and mind you, at least one of the bishops of a city would end up dying at the hands of these crusaders, quote unquote, air quote, many times over, because they weren't really that. And mind you, he actually, this guy actually called the militia together to defend the walls of the monastery, hiding the Jews inside that were in the city to keep them from being killed by these radicals that were nuts. You say, well, is there such a thing as a radical or yeah, there is. Is there such a thing as a religious radical? Yes, there is. Is there such a thing as a person who goes off the deep end and no one claims him because he's such an idiot because he does terrible things? Yeah,
yes,
that was these guys. They were absolutely nuts. And they end up breaking down the walls and end up killing the bishop of the town. So yeah, that got condemned, and those people were wrong in what they did, and everyone knew it. And it happened more than one town, more than one city, and there's more than one heroic measure done by different bishops of the church, of the Christian church, to try and quell this, to try and stop it. And for the most part, it was what it was. People did some terrible things. Unfortunate. Now we get to group number two, and that's the really poor people.
Oh,
and knights that were broke. And this gets led by a guy called Peter the Hermit. And Peter
because
the
that's
Hermit,
who you wanted the head of your army, is a guy called Peter the Hermit.
Peter the Hermit gets everyone going, and it gets all these really, really common downtrodden poor people.
You've got debtors and people trying to get free of taxes, and people with death sentences.
Men, women, and children, and of the poorer end, and ill-equipped, and they don't wait for the regular army to go.
And
they head out early.
Winter.
And they end up marching all the way through. And of course, since they have no money, they're having to kind of forage and pillage, which means steal along the way. And they finally get to where they're going. And when they get to Constantinople, they're there in a time when there isn't food. The harvest that they're offset.
Did they even make it to Constantinople?
You know what? They ultimately did make it.
Eventually.
And when they did, Alexius Comnenus, after seeing that they were very hungry and there was no food for them, very quickly arranged transport for them to go right on to the crusade. Do not pass go. I'm going to take you right across the river. Good luck. Whereupon they were then almost killed to a man by a Seljuk army. And there was very few of them remaining that were alive when the main crusade actually got there. But they did. There was actually some that did get in that group and actually continue on to fight. But the truth is that they pretty well got almost wiped out to a man, almost, just as soon as they got there. And again, they had not planned. This was not, their ability to plan wasn't there. They didn't have that ability. And they got there at the wrong time of season, and I'm telling you, they weren't spoken well at all. The historian and daughter of the Byzantine emperor at that time wrote, and those Frankish soldiers were accompanied by an unarmed host, more numerous than the sand or the stars, carrying palms and crosses on their shoulders, women and children, too, come away from their country. So it was really a really mixed bunch of people, and they were pretty well killed mostly by a Seljuk army as soon as they got there. So now they're kind of mostly out of the way, and we get back to the real crusade, Graham. Now,
the one
back to real Crusade.
The one in Europe is still being planned while these people are just running around playing
Absolutely.
Army.
Phase 1 was a bust. And everyone said, that's not canon.
That's not what we were calling for.
No. And so now comes the second wave of Crusaders. Graham, would you please do us a fine pleasure of introducing the lineup of leaders that are going to come here?
All right, we've got 6 primary, and this is not an exhaustive list.
Oh no, there's other guys involved.
There's plenty of people that you could call leaders.
What's his name from Toulouse? I don't know.
Raymond.
Yeah.
We'll get to him. So we've got Hugh, and these are French names, so I'm going to struggle with them.
Yeah.
Hugh of Vermandois.
Vermandois.
Godfrey of Bouillon. Bohemond of Toronto. Not Canada. Taranto. Toronto. Raymond of Toulouse.
Toulouse.
And Robert of Normandy.
And Robert of the only one I can say square. Normandy. That's easy.
So you got 5 different armies.
And
because each of these guys had their own army. They all took a different path when they finally got on the road 6 months later when it was actually
you're
time
saying
to
that
march.
they really weren't one army? Explain.
They all took a different route to Constantinople, met up in Constantinople, and then went on as one larger army. The ones that survived.
But not only was this a different group of guys, some of them were different nationalities.
Some
of their troops probably didn't even speak the same language.
Most of them were French. But what we consider French was then broken up into France and Normandy and all these different areas. So while they were all from what we would consider France, they may not have spoken the same language. We know the Normans and the Franks had a different language.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of differences here, both socially and economically, and leadership-wise, and weaponry-wise, and any wise that you can think of.
Right. But
very
they
little of it
were
was
well
wise.
equipped. That's the big thing about them. They were well equipped and ready to go to war.
These people had the money. They had the support of the government, quote unquote.
Right.
This was the actual army.
So they arrive, and Alexis Comnenus wants them to be sure to swear allegiance to him because, after all, this is all about retaking territory
for him.
For Alexis.
For Alexis.
This territory is going to be retaken and given back to the Byzantine Empire, right?
No. Well, that was the plan.
Totally backfired.
But hardly any of them actually agreed to do that.
Yeah, I think a few of them did, and one of them absolutely not,
Let's see. I think it was Raymond of Toulouse that did a pretty good job of it.
Right.
He was pretty honorable through this whole thing, as honorable as somebody could be in 1095. And I think it was Bohemond that was really the big holdout.
Yeah.
And I may not be right about that, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
He was the one that he was in it for himself. And as we go along, I think we'll make that very clear. Some of these leaders were, fairly honorable people, and some of them were not.
Right.
So, again, this is a different time period. You can't judge by today's standards.
Yeah. And one of them going there was actually already an enemy of Comnenus. So Comnenus wasn't exactly thrilled when the Crusaders arrived at his doorstep because really he wasn't sure what was going to happen next because this isn't really what he wanted. He ended up getting what he got.
Well, that was Bohemond.
And remember, Bohemond.
The one that had fought with him earlier. So
Alexander Comnenus exactly understood that you can't always get what you want, but
sometimes you get what you need.
Well, anyway, I was waiting for you to finish that line, man. So what are they going to do, man? What's going to happen next?
So they meet up in Constantinople. They blow off the emperor.
Yeah, most of them do. Yeah,
for the large amount of them.
The emperor sends a couple guys with him. They're going to ride shotgun, and he's like, "Hey, if you guys, we're going to send some troops later. Go start, and we'll come along."
Right.
Okay. And again, Alexis never keeps his promise on this. Never.
Well, he had reasons not to.
Yeah, it didn't work out too well.
So the first major battle that we're going to talk about is Antioch.
Right, because that is the first major block to them getting in there to ultimately get to Jerusalem. That's the goal in their minds, is to ultimately take Jerusalem. And when they get there, they are immediately challenged, and they find very little resources because the Seljuk Turks are retreating and destroying everything that's being left behind. So there's no food stores, and they arrive on the outskirts of Antioch, hungry and a little desperate, and they find it's a very, very large city, and there's a massive, giant, bouldery rock mountain that sits on the back side of it.
Yeah.
So you can't even surround the whole city, and it's got a river that runs on one side that cuts right through, and they find that they can't stop supplies from coming into the city on one side and cover the other side. So basically they're stalemated for a while there.
They sieged the city, which basically means they tried to surround it and cut off the supply line.
Sure. Let's see, how many troops was this at this time? They arrived there with what?
I don't remember.
It was like 20...
I know it was a very substantial lowering from what they left with.
You know what? I've got the stats on that. Give me just a second, I'll pull it up, but you keep going.
Okay. So they had all kinds of problems with Antioch. They were constantly running short of food. They were having to dodge Turkish raids from the outside and Antioch attacking from the city walls.
Right.
They were really having a bad time of it.
Yeah, because the Seljuks inside that city had prepared. They knew everyone. They knew these guys were coming, so the food stores were good. And I'm looking at an estimation there that they consisted of approximately 30 to 35,000 Crusaders, including about 5,000 cavalrymen. But we know that they'll be reduced in number significantly right here at this very outset to a significantly lower number of troops. It gets super small in just a minute by the time you get done. It's like 12,000 or something like that. Actual guys.
It got less than 20,000.
So this is not a major thing. We've got very few people involved, to be honest. So they're trying to take Antioch, and Antioch is resistant. They're pulling in supplies. So these guys get the idea that really the way to break Antioch is to stop the supplies coming from the coast. So a raid is done that goes down in and does hit the coastline and stops that city from being able to bring stuff up like it was doing into the city. They were bringing it across land. Well, okay, that's fine. But now, while that's going on, they've got to bring their supplies across the same route because they're out of supplies and they're at a stalemate until finally they have a break. And
they get some reinforcements.
They do.
A couple of the lagging behind Crusader armies finally showed up.
Finally.
And so it gave them a new surge. It gave them a little bit of, some new heart, vigor.
Right.
It revitalized them.
Right.
In more than just physical ways. Now, mind you, when they left, it was 1096. It is now over halfway through 1097. I want to say it was October when they got to Antioch.
That's crazy.
They're at Antioch. They're not in Jerusalem, and it's been over a year.
Wow.
And by the time they leave Antioch, it will be well over a year. Almost 2 years into this thing.
Wow.
So they besiege the city. They finally find a way into the walls. They actually had somebody on the inside basically open the door and say, "Here you go."
Wow.
Because they found a way to actually starve the city out. They cut off the supply lines. They were actually starving the city. So finally somebody on the inside turned traitor.
Right.
And said...
Which was a guy named Bohemond conspired with a guy, Frows or something? Firouz? I can't remember. An Armenian. And was a convert to Islam and the captain of the guard on one of the sides. He allowed the Crusaders across or access to the tower of what's called Two Sisters. And Bohemond gets this gate opened, and then you know what happens? The Crusaders rush inside, and they just
killed
start
everybody.
butchering everybody in the entire city. They managed to kill the Christians, most of the Christians, most of the Jews, and also get some Seljuks in the turret. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
But mind you, now if the roles had been reversed, that's what the other army would have done. That was just the way it was done.
They couldn't tell who was who when they got inside the city, and that's just how it was.
But they did take Antioch.
That's
good news, right?
Right.
So they take the city and they close up all the doors and they close up all the windows and they post their guards.
Hurrah!
And then they realize that they don't have any supplies because they've cut off the supply lines. Right. And now the ones that were inside the city are sieging the ones that were sieging the city when they were inside the city.
And in this,
did you follow that?
In come the Seljuk Turks with their army now to besiege the city that they just besieged. So now Antioch has been besieged and sort of sacked. Not completely destroyed, but now it's taken over. Now the Crusader army is now inside the city, and now they are now being besieged by Islamic forces or the Seljuk Turks as they showed up. And here we are. And they're outside.
So they switched positions, basically.
And everybody is kind of worn out, hungry, thirsty. It's bad. There are stories of cannibalism that are going on here. Yeah. There's stories that it was that bad at this point.
And part of what would come to bite them later was that while they were at Antioch, they started eating their animals.
Right.
And so later they wouldn't have their animals to pull their gear. They needed.
Man.
So the ones that starved, they ate, and some of them they just killed to eat.
It's about that time that, even though this happened, that the Alexius troop that he had sent down decided to turn back. The Turks were getting ready to go after the city again, and Alexius pulled his troops back. And that's what really embittered these Crusaders against Alexius.
And part of that was Bohemond. Because Bohemond was one of the primary leaders at this point.
Right.
He was the one that made the deal with the guy to get the city.
True.
But here's what happened.
So everybody's bummed, man.
Everybody's bad.
And they feel like everything is hopeless.
Like
it's all going to be bad. We'll be right back after this break with more from the Bunker Brothers and the First Crusade. Graham, in the world today, being inclusive is a big thing. And Sheep Below Ministries is just that, inclusive.
Sheep Below is an online ministry group, right?
Graham, you're so out of date. They prefer the term evangelism.
All right, why would I want to get involved with Sheep Below Ministries? Aren't they just a bunch of stuffy old preachers?
No, they're men and women just like us. They come from all over the world. Sure, some of them are preachers and chaplains, but most are just regular people who want to do something to spread the word of God.
Really? What could I do?
Whatever you want. They already have Bible studies, podcasts, and even a writing ministry.
But what if I want to do something different? Feel called to minister to bikers, or play music, or even preach on a street corner?
That's great. God calls us for a reason and gives us something we can do to share with others. So get up with Sheep Below Ministries and start something.
So how would I contact Sheep Below Ministries and get something new started?
It's easy. You can email them at sheepbelowministries@gmail.com.
Email? Now that's sort of outdated, isn't it? With all the social media in the world.
They're on social media too. Facebook, Twitter, and coming soon to Instagram.
Let me see if I have this straight. Sheep Below Ministries may let me do something that I'm interested in and spread the gospel?
You never know until you contact them.
sheepbelowministries@gmail.com.
Or Facebook, which is www.facebook.com/sheepbelow.
Or on Twitter @belowsheep.
Sheep Below Ministries.
Serving the sheep below until they are
at last above. And we're back with more of the Bunker Brothers and the First Crusade. What's going to happen now?
They didn't have any toilet paper to run out of.
What are we going to do?
So
if only someone would have a vision.
There's a guy named Peter Bartholomew.
This has got way too many Peters in the story.
Yes, it does.
Peter Bartholomew,
Peter the
Hermit. It just can't get.
So he was actually a member of Raymond of Toulouse's army.
Oh, a true believer. Because Raymond was one of those true believer kind of guys.
And so he experienced a vision. And he said that God told him that inside Antioch, where they just happened to be, was the Spear of Destiny,
The spear.
or the Spear of Longinus.
You mean the spear that supposedly was used on Jesus' side
Yeah.
to pierce it?
Yeah.
Not the one located because you realize at this time there are 3 or 4
There's
others.
like 4 of them, floating around.
Okay, so this
but
is just going to be the real one,
This is the real one.
as opposed to the one that is elsewhere.
And so he has a vision from Jesus Christ and Saint Andrew, according to him.
Man, how
pretty
lucky
pretty
are
good,
they.
pretty good, reputable sources, I would
And
say.
in this, where to dig for it, right?
And so he goes and he starts digging in Antioch, and he finds a chunk of metal, and he
What?
says, "Look, it's the spear."
What?
We
What
don't know what
luck?
it was.
What luck that he would find that.
Well, it actually turns out to be pretty lucky for them.
Yeah, because it inspired the guys to go ahead and get up and fight.
It really did inspire everybody.
Because now they knew God was really, really, really on their side, right?
Yeah,
Forget
because-
about the spear in Rome, Vienna, Antioch, and Exmasden, or whatever the heck it's called. Forget about the 4 or 5 others that
Well, this
are
is the
around.
one at Antioch, so
Right. I'm just saying, forget about all the other ones. This is the real one. The one in Vienna, Austria can't possibly be the real one. I'm sure they actually said that. Okay. So this is what's happening. This is just some made up stuff to get the guys rallied.
But
That's what
they
this is.
get it works. They get rallied.
They do.
They get excited again.
Yep.
They open the gates and they actually attack the Seljuk army.
They attack the Seljuk army by charging out of the gates on force, and they attack a army that is about 75,000 men strong, and they've got right now 15,000 tired and poorly equipped crusaders, and they win. They win. They cause the withdrawal of the Seljuk Turks from that Syria battle, and they flee. The Seljuks flee. And it was crazy. You know what? Here's the big thing, too. We got to remember that these guys were armored, and it made them slower. Crusader soldiers were slower because they're heavily armored. But it also meant that it was a great defense against the primarily archery-based weaponry being thrown at them. So it gave them an advantage. Now, the speed was on the side of the Seljuks, because they knew how to get around better. They were lighter armed.
I think the fact that they just actually opened the door and charged,
no one expected that.
Caught them off guard. And they weren't.
Yeah.
The Seljuks. Most people think they were a well-defined army and all these great things, and they really weren't.
There were some splits within them that were tribally based.
It was very tribal.
Yeah. But remember,
they were basically doing the same thing the Crusaders were doing, though.
Right.
They had brought groups of people in from different parts of the world.
Right.
Their little slice of the world, and throwing them together, and languages didn't match, and customs didn't match,
right?
Weaponry didn't match, and they weren't. Either side wasn't a true army at this point.
But the sad thing is that after this happens, about August 1st, 1098, Adamir, and one of the leaders of the First Crusade, Bishop Adamir, he dies. And that was a kind of a little bit of a blow, because Adamir was along with it to kind of keep everybody in line with Rome.
He was the guy that the Pope had put in charge.
So now
it had gone way out of his control anyway.
Cruise control was definitely off at this time.
But with him gone, it totally... they put the pedal to the metal and anything goes.
And there's going to be a few other little nicks and notches going on here. That is true. But the pretty crazy thing is now they see a clear route to get to what is their absolute target, which is Jerusalem. That's where they're going to be headed next.
Remember, that's not what the Pope had called for.
Not so much, no.
He had called for them to assist Comnenus, who we haven't talked about in a while, but he's still around.
Well, they hadn't talked about him in a while either.
They hadn't bothered to bother
they
with him
weren't
in a
worried
while.
about Comnenus sitting up there. No.
So this is something that they just kind of decided on their own on the road.
Yeah, we're going to go. This is our goal.
If
our goal
we're
is to go to
halfway there,
Jerusalem.
we might as well go all the way.
We're this far. And then what was really interesting is, as they begin to go down through the countryside and go that way, they do happen on some resistance here and there. But for the most part, they find that most of the cities will just say, Hi. Oh, you're the next occupier? We're so-and-so, and we're on your side.
Yeah.
So that happened on several occasions. And why is that? And we got to remember that the region they're going to go through, once they start leaving Antioch, had just been captured from the Seljuk Turks by the Egyptians, by forces from Egypt that had come up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the Seljuk Turks did not mind the Crusaders going down that way because it wasn't coming their way. Remember, the Seljuk Turks were up in what we call Turkey. It's north of there. It's not, so the Crusaders are going away from you, not at you.
Right.
Because the Crusaders weren't there to conquer the Seljuks. They were there to free up
Take
territory.
Jerusalem.
Right.
They
well,
were,
yeah.
They
take
were there
Jerusalem.
about land.
And so
They were not. They didn't care
right?
about who was there.
So they started heading south, and they don't find a lot of resistance. There's a few scuffles that happen, it's true. But then they finally get to see the city of Jerusalem in the distance, and it fires them up, man, because they want to take Jerusalem. And they all go there, and they're going to do it the right way. They're going to siege this place. They're going to siege it. They're going to run at the walls, and they're going to get killed. There's not a lot of them. There may be 20,000 of them, maybe 15,000 or so.
Well, they left Antioch with 15.
Yeah, it's not that good.
So I'm guessing they were down lower than that.
It was pretty rough. And their cavalry was low. And they go down in front of Jerusalem.
Because they ate horses.
Yeah, and Jerusalem's walls were actually quite well defended. That was a little bit of a shock to them. So now
they were
outside Jerusalem.
Some of the Crusader reports actually said they hoped if they hit the walls hard enough that the walls would just crumble like they did at Jericho.
Okay, well, I mean, that was what they wanted, and I think they marched a little around it probably, you know. I want to say they did do some marching around it because they really wanted to get everybody's attention, and they were hopeful that that God would do something very miraculous. But in the end, it was a little less miraculous, I think it was.
Now, when we get to Jerusalem and we hit walls because we think they're just going to fall down.
Right.
This is July of 1099.
Wow.
We've been going from home for almost 4 years.
Oh, my
we have
land.
just now made it to Jerusalem.
That is crazy. I can't believe it.
This is a long walk for people without any kind of mechanized
Man, you aren't kidding.
military.
You aren't kidding.
So
That's crazy.
They get there. It takes them about a week to actually breach the walls of Jerusalem.
Man.
But they do get them breached at two different points. We talked about Godfrey of Bouillon earlier. He and his brother Baldwin, and Baldwin will become important later.
Right.
They attacked the north wall at St. Stephen's Gate.
Right.
And Raymond at the Jaffa Gate.
Okay, so they kind of split up in two. So they're basically going to like the north and then the south side of the city, sort of cornered a little bit.
Southwest, yeah.
Right.
And they were able to break through the walls.
With a slight bit of help. I'm pretty sure there was some help on this occasion, Graham.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't just one person.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, there was a raid that went over the wall on one of the that happened on the southern side. If I'm not mistaken, there was a raid that happened where they actually went over the wall and got the gate open.
Oh, well, that helps.
Yeah, that I recall that happening, and it was crazy. It was just crazy.
But this is the part of the first crusade that everybody goes nuts over. Forget all the bad stuff that's happened up until this point on both sides.
Right.
This is the part that everybody goes crazy over. Now, modern estimates say probably about 100,000 people got killed.
Right.
That's a lot of people.
Sure.
The reports at the time were that they killed everybody in sight and that the roads were flowing with blood up to their knees. Oh. Now, that's not realistic.
No.
That is a victorious army saying, look what we did.
Right.
Now, a lot of people died. It was a very ugly battle.
It was terrible.
A lot of people died on both sides of it.
Well, that's what you did. This was a different time of warfare. And unfortunately, that was one of the things that happened was they would have brutal killing. I mean, we forget that it's not too long ago that carpet bombing was considered something that we would do. The 20th century let me tell you something. Let me make this very clear. Flying with bombers, whether it was being the Germans flying, and they were aggressor, like World War II, them flying over the bombers and just bombing entire cities was way more devastating than this actual kerfluffle
Oh, yeah.
that we call the Crusade. And of course, the Allies also bombing, and I'm not trying to judge that, but bombing Germany back. Carpet bomb, just flying over you with tons and tons of bombs and just letting it loose on your city.
And Germany did the same thing to England.
Right. And these guys, their numbers wise can't compare to the amount of struggles and the weaponry and death that happen in other places.
Now,
and yet this is all anyone ever focuses on is the Crusades.
Well, and just to get back to where we started from, I will admit this one: the Crusaders did round up all the Jews, or most of the Jews in the city. They forced them into a synagogue and set it on fire. In
Jerusalem, they did do that, and
that's a horrible thing.
The same time, there were Crusaders there that were trying to prevent it, and they failed. But that it was wrong, and no one. I mean, I'm never going to say that's right. We all know it was wrong.
I'm glad.
Well, we all know it was wrong, and so we're not justifying that. In fact, we say those things and tell the truth about it because you see, if you want to just cover those things up. One, you're doing the wrong thing. God doesn't cover up the mistakes of these guys. He doesn't cover up the mistakes of some of the people in Scripture. You got to call it what it is. They did some things that were absolutely 100% horrible.
Yeah.
And but their reasons for it were, they themselves had a religious reason to a degree. But deep down, they were also trying to prevent the ultimate fall of Europe to the Turks and to other forces that were invading. And you got to remember, Europe at this time was in a pincer. The forces that had been invading through the Rock of Gibraltar across into Spain already. Spain was already in the control of what we call the forces of Islam, if you want to call it that at that time. But they were under control that way. And then the other pincer side was coming in the other way on Constantinople. And basically, if someone didn't fight and do something to take the pressure off of Europe, Europe was going to collapse, and there wouldn't be a European nations at all. They would all be under control of some sort of another troop from either the Seljuks or Egyptians or one of the other countries like that. And so it was a fight not just to go down and take the Crusade, take the Holy Land, but it was a way of taking the pressure off of Europe on moving the battle onto a different front. And that's what was going down deep, deep down. Now, I don't know if they were even thinking at that level, strategy-wise, but that is what happened. It makes you have to defend and attack in a different way, and it will definitely waffle what's going on for a minute. It'll at least put a bump in the plan. In fact, the forces that have to pull back on that way take some of the pressure off of the forces that are located over in Spain a little bit, and that's a crusade no one talks about. Because a reconquista of Spain was a 100% success that took hundreds of years to do. And then the different kingdoms that were formed during that time joined together and reunited to become one nation, which we have today called Spain.
Okay.
So people don't talk about the reconquista of Spain much. It was a crusade that actually worked to retake that territory for Spain.
Now,
out of an invader. And that's what I think people forget. We're talking about invasions, invasive peoples. People don't think of it like that.
Now, here's one of the parts that really interests me. We've made it to Jerusalem. We've sacked Jerusalem.
Yay!
Now, what do we do with it?
We pick someone to rule it. And I think a few guys had a good idea that it must be them, because after all, they were the best.
And they did everything, and nobody else did anything.
No one else did anything.
Well, so the synagogue fire was July 16th, 1099.
Uh-huh.
July 22nd, so roughly a week later, Raymond of Toulouse was offered the title of King of Jerusalem.
Well, he was a really humble guy.
But he didn't take it.
Yeah, because you know why?
Because he wanted a different title.
Because he was a really humble guy.
Godfrey was also offered the same title and turned it down.
Yeah, because he was a really humble guy.
No, Godfrey wasn't. Godfrey turned down the title King of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
However,
he
took the title of Advocus Sancti Septuri.
Oh, defender of...
advocate of the Holy Sepulchre.
Okay, defender of the Holy Sepulchre.
Uh,
So I'm going to rule, but I'm going to do it under a title that makes me sound like I'm,
Sounds kind of like Gideon.
Now, Jerusalem. Now, here's the thing. It's
I like the
important.
way you ignored that.
I did. Right. Totally did. So, what is a reality of the First Crusade when it comes to Christianity? Do the First Crusades...
Oh, wait a minute. We're not done yet. We're not done yet.
We're not? 'Cause I was
No.
going for the wrap-up.
I know. But I wanted to point out that all that title stuff was July 22nd-ish. Well, the Pope died on July 29th, so he had never heard that they actually made it all the way to Jerusalem.
Pope Urbanus dies in 1099.
Yep. He actually died the same week that they took the city, or within a week when they took the city.
Yeah, that's really rough. But you know what? It did help him reestablish some control. I think one reason why he got involved was this was an opportunity to kind of draw back together the East and the Western Church, and maybe bring it back underneath him, and maybe make him look like the better Pope, the Pope that really is the real one. And it's one of those things. It could be, but we do know that the Crusaders were able to get settled in there, and then they formed a few little Crusader states, little kingdoms here and there and here that weren't that big but did exist, and they kind of ran that edge of land on the Mediterranean.
They did.
It wasn't a big territory. The kingdom of Jerusalem.
We started in the south with the kingdom of Jerusalem.
We got the county of Tripoli to the north, the principality of Antioch, and then the county of Edessa.
And then the kingdom of Lesser Armenia.
And so now...
And so you got 5 or 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what would end up being called Crusader States.
Okay, so what I want to say right here is something important. Everyone wants to rub Christians' nose in the Crusades. And when you look at the Crusades, ultimately you end up with about 12 to 15,000 men who take a narrow strip of territory from an invasive group of people at that time that end up setting up small kingdoms down through there. It is not a major, huge, significant bump in the world. But it does involve Europe into the East again. And it's going to show that this is a trend that will continue as the Europeans and their descendants will keep their eye on this land and have a relationship with it.
And a lot of people did die.
A lot of
both
people did
sides.
die. That's no doubt. But now we got to remember that dying in warfare and famine and battle was it's one of the ways to go back then.
Yeah.
It's not nice to say, but that is what happened. I mean, we're never going to know the countless amount of people that were carried off and killed by different groups fighting over there, fighting in those countries. Another thing about that, too, is many people refuse to talk about, except for a few, how many people were enslaved by the Seljuks, by the Turks, and by other forces over there who gladly carried off many, many thousands and thousands of people into slavery, especially if they were Christians at times. Although in Jerusalem there was a lot of understanding. You could be a Jew or a Christian and live in Jerusalem. You just had to pay an extra tax.
Right.
And we're always told how thoughtful that was, by the way, and how peaceable it was. But it was living by extortion. Let's call that what it is.
Yeah.
But they did, for the most part, live in relative. Put it like that. I can't say peace, but relative, because
they lived.
It was still extortion.
That was about all they did. They lived.
So, the Crusades, are they really evidence that Christianity creates violence?
No.
Is it really evidence that religion creates violence?
Maybe. But not the way people assume.
Is it so huge an amount of people involved that it's the defining moment for everyone?
No,
Absolutely not.
And let's remember that the Crusades era that people talk about lasted several hundred years.
Yeah, it was a constant back and forth struggle that was going to go on.
I mean, it ran on until the 1500s, I believe.
And countries struggled like that all the time. I mean, if you want to read about Europe had all kinds of wars before and after this. There's a lot of wars. and very few of them actually had any religious
And according
principle.
to Mr. James,
Yeah.
only 7% of them had anything to do with religion.
With religion at all.
So
Very good point. So when people want to rub your nose in the Crusades as being the reason why Christianity is so bad,
do what I do. Ask them to tell you why. Because they can't
right.
tell you anything about
Tell
the
me
Crusades.
what. Tell me what. And if they are knowledgeable and they tell you that the Crusaders did the bad things that they did do to both Jews, remind them they also did it to Christians
agree,
over there.
I agree with them.
Agree with them, and also remind them that they also killed the Christians in those cities.
Yeah.
Because
They killed
couldn't tell.
everybody.
They couldn't tell who was what. They weren't so racially understanding. They weren't so. They didn't have any classes on sensitivity training.
They really didn't care who they killed.
No, they weren't. They really did not, because that's how war was in their mind, and it doesn't justify it. But that's how it was for them.
I'm getting depressed now
Why?
because it's just so terrible on both sides.
Well, because when you get to why, because there's a second crusade and a third crusade
And a fourth
and
and a
it
fifth.
gets really crazy after this.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a group of crusaders that don't even make it really to the Middle East. They end up sacking a Christian city. They end up helping another group of people attack another city that's near them. And they end up getting kicked out of the church for doing so by the Pope. They get excommunicated by the Pope, along with the first city's people. Hey, let me tell you something. Let me be honest.
And
right?
we won't even talk about the Children's Crusade, which was nothing but a mass kidnapping.
Right. Well, those kids went there and marched off, and they got slaughtered because they thought we're going to win because we're innocent and pure, and it didn't go so well.
So anyway, back to reality.
To reality, sir.
Now we have our own crusade against the coronavirus.
Right?
Yay.
Guys, we really enjoyed talking to you about the first crusade a little bit. Don't let people hang you up on historical things where they try to make it look like Christianity is bad because of one event in history, because it just doesn't work that way. And so, it's just how it is.
And I like what Tyson James said on the memes episode. He said, "Don't be afraid to agree with things that are true."
Right.
There's no reason to. I think his breakdown of how he judges memes could work in this situation too.
Absolutely.
Because
yeah.
you've got the what are we looking at? Get the history down.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Right. And does it change anything about...
Does it change what Christ taught?
Does it change anything about Jesus Christ? If these guys did things they shouldn't do, which they did...
Do we blame that on Jesus?
Was that Jesus? Well,
No.
we know it wasn't. We know it wasn't. We know that if Jesus was there, or they paid attention to the Word of God, or any one of these things, which remember, most of them couldn't read anyway. The
Yeah.
knights couldn't read. And so if they paid attention to the Word of God was said, or they had been taught properly, they wouldn't have done half it. They still may have attacked the place militarily, because it was a military goal.
Right.
But they wouldn't have done all the butchery they did. So that's important to remember, Graham.
So-
Thanks so much, guys. Graham, I've had a great time. I've enjoyed it.
And don't forget to check out Sheep Glow and Lighthouse Cafe
Awesome.
on Facebook, Twitter, Wattpad, YouTube, all of your social media outlets.
Be
except
calm.
Instagram.
Stay calm and wash your hands.
Goodbye.